our greatest strength is in our ability to get vulnerable, right? It is our vulnerability where the seed of our greatest potential lies.
Welcome back to the Power and Purpose podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. I have Christian Minson. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
So I love asking my signature question, who are you and who are you not?
That is such a good question. I've seen you ask it on some of the other podcasts that I've reviewed. And, it really, I think it gives pause to really consider, who am I? I think that is a question that I'm continually striving to answer myself, in the sense that I believe we're all manifestations of the divine source. And, in that we are all unique manifestations, and striving to recognize that uniqueness and bring it into this three-dimensional world. So part of what I am, I think, is a creative source for helping others discover that that connection with their divinity. And when I think about who I am not, there is nothing that I am not. And what I mean by that, and what I take that question very seriously, in the sense that everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly, is all part of me. And really, in striving not to deny any of it, is I think a real evolution towards self-acceptance, which helps us to then recognize the divinity that we truly are.
I love that. Thank you for sharing it. And this question never gets old, because there's so many different perspectives, and we are all of it, all at the same time. And then just depending on our intention and what season we're in and what we're focusing on, that question can kind of just help us expand beyond our identity, or maybe hone in on an identity. So I love the way you answered it, because it's such big picture, universal, divine source energy, encompassing everything all at once. And so that way we don't get caught up in the nitty-gritty details, or the shame and the fear of who we once were and all of that, because sometimes that could be just as limiting. So thank you for that. I love it. And just a little bit about your journey. When did you really, what was the turning point for you into emotional connection, spiritual connection? Did you have a part of your life where you were in the complete opposite, or were you always aware of emotions and spirituality?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And I could give an extremely long answer. I'll try to shorten it down, because this basically has been the path of my life. I grew up as a child in a military family. And as I like to remind people, in the military, emotions are more of a liability than an asset. So we really grew up suppressing emotions, not really, the family didn't express emotions to any great degree. There wasn't a lot of training or example of what it meant to be emotional. If we were emotional, is basically, you got the evil eye or a SWAT, to like get over it. And so that really was my life, through my formative years, high school into college. And, it really, it caused me to be very moody, very, all this suppressed energy, needs to do something. It either leaks out in some sort of way, like moods and such, or it will explode. And there were definitely explosive moments where I just couldn't contain it anymore. And those never went well. It In some ways, I'd say that the good news there, and again, came back to the question of what we are and accepting all that we are, that this really helped me in a sense look for something more out of life, and that got me on the spiritual path. Long story short, there I dove so deeply into the spiritual path that I became a monk in a spiritual order for 10 years of my life, and it was really there that that really helped me get focused and get grounded, but it still didn't help me really access my emotions. And it wasn't until 10 years into that experience where I started to have these weird feelings that it was time to go. And there was no reason really. I enjoyed the life. I was a good monk overall. I did what I was supposed to do, and I was getting results. But the sense that it was time to move on was really disturbing me. And now, as I look back at it in retrospect, this was really, all those 10 years were really preparing me for the moment where I could start to face my emotions and start to make a difference there. So I was introduced to breathwork in that at that time, and I'll have to qualify that we were in a meditative order, and my meditations just weren't good, because every time I sat down, that all this confusion and anxiety came and bubbled up to the surface. So when I was introduced to this breathwork that I now teach, it really helped me first get in touch with this energy inside me, which, recognize that I do have this emotional energy. It gave me a safe container with which to start expressing this energy. And ultimately, it helped me to integrate this energy, to come to terms with the fact that I do have emotions, that emotions are that what I like to say, the color of life. They really bring so much to our experience, and that it's not bad to have emotions, even those emotions that we consider bad or less savory experiences. And so that really helped me to get in touch with my own emotional makeup, to start championing the idea that emotions are important. And in fact, I feel like a healthy spiritual life can only be built on a stable emotional foundation. So otherwise, we've heard that term spiritual bypassing, which has come into vogue over the last decade or so. I feel like spiritual bypassing is really trying to circumvent the fact that we haven't dealt with a lot of emotional upheaval of, traumas, garbage, whatever is, underneath the surface.
Yes. Yeah. I was going to get to that one, and we will dive more into emotional bypassing, because it's such it could be a distraction, it could be a detour, and it really keeps us from accessing our true self. Like, we have to get through those emotions. But thank you so much for sharing your journey. It's so interesting that you were a monk. You said for 10 years?
10 years.
And I understand that, you were doing your work as a monk, and then you just got to the point to where the emotions were arising, and that's when you probably made the transition, into breath work or other things besides just the monk lifestyle, besides just the meditation. Even as powerful as meditation is, you're right, it doesn't, it can help us sit with emotions, but it doesn't really necessarily help us process the raw emotion, especially the suppressed ones from the past.
What I learned over time, meditation is deceptively simple, right? We just sit there, we quiet the mind, quiet the body. It seems like we do nothing, but what I discovered over living that path day in and day out for 10 years, and many years on the front end as far as just a spiritual path and being not a monk, is that the meditation presupposes that we've done some of this foundational work. It is for meditation to really be effective, we have to have a relatively calm and stable foundation in our lives so that when we sit down and meditate, all this stuff underneath the surface doesn't come up and crowd our minds, what people will call the monkey mind, or all those disturbances that as soon as we get calm, everything that we haven't dealt with says, hey, now's the time for you to deal with me.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And so my question to you about your monk lifestyle, because I'm really interested in it, and then we'll move on to some of the good stuff around emotions and meditation. What were some other highlights through that experience?
What's funny is the highlights are things that you would never expect to be part of a monastic life. One of the philosophies was, as a monk, we're giving up our life in a way. We're giving up our desires, for a worldly life, the things that most people enjoy in the world. We've chosen to renounce. A monastic life is a renunciance life. However, the philosophy kind of was, when we give up our desires, the divine will find a way to fulfill your noble desires. Meaning, maybe not your debaucherous desires, but those things. So I always wanted to be a rock star. It was like, to perform, to share music and all that. And as a monk, I ended up performing with the LA Philharmonic Orchestra in front of 300 people. So that was, that's a whole nother story for another time. I just, we had a yearly event where we changed our library into a cafe or coffee shop, and then we had waiters, some of the monks played the waiters, some played the patrons, and I got to be part of the jazz band that was, a jazz trio that played in the background. So again, these kind of things were fulfilling of these desires that I had thought I had to give up, but in the end, they came back. And
yes. And to me, I interpret that to mean, and you can tell me your interpretation, I interpret that to be, you became more an energetic match for those desires to actually come into fruition.
Yeah, it's I still don't understand the mechanism and how it works, except that in giving up the desire, the energy that, sometimes it's our pushing and our efforting that actually causes a backup of the energy and doesn't allow the energy to flow. Yeah.
So I want to dive into, what are the signs that someone has suppressed emotions? Because you talked about your journey, about how it was all bubbling up. And I've had my own experience. I won't go into it, but I'll just mention here, for me, it was this rebellious energy that was just like crazy, rebellious, very extreme, throwing books across the room in high school. Like, it was that type of anger. And I don't even know if I was really feeling anger. It was just like, I just want to rebel, right? Like, I just want to go against the grain. I just want to, like, embrace some confrontational energy, even if I wasn't angry at anyone in the moment, in the present. It was all past stuff that was coming up. So that's my extreme story. But what are some tools and tips for anyone who's listening? What are some signs?
Yeah. So the signs that there's emotions underneath the surface. Two ways that I see. I say, emotions are emotion, energy in motion. And, when we have an emotion, it comes up and it's meant to be expressed. The emotion it's created within us and it's meant to come out of us. But in the moment we have it, we have a choice to either allow it to be expressed or say, I'm not so sure I want to express this one, and hold that energy down, right? We suppress it, we hold it back. The unfortunate thing there is that, as the great psychotherapist Sigmund Freud once said, unexpressed emotions never die, they just reemerge in darker and uglier ways.
Mm.
So some of these signs we're talking about, these darker and uglier ways that emotions come up, they will get expressed. And one of them is they'll leak out in idiosyncratic behaviors, right? So I mentioned for myself, moodiness. If people are moody, right, that is a perfect sign that there's stuff underneath the surface that wants to come out, but they're holding it back, or they don't know how. We don't feel it's appropriate. We've been shamed or what have you into, if we do express it, it doesn't feel safe to allow ourselves to be that vulnerable. So if people are acting moody or just off, you'll see these behaviors that don't connect or correlate to the situation, right? It just doesn't seem like there's an obvious harmony to their response to whatever's going on, and the actual thing going on. Those are great signs that that there's a lot of emotional suppression. When people are reactive, just as you were explaining, big bursts of again emotions that come out, and it may be at, again, random times.
Random
It
times.
doesn't it doesn't have a connection to necessarily the thing going on in the moment. That again is a huge sign that that there's stuff that person is struggling with. And here, the important point to recognize is we tend to again point the finger at them, say that that's bad, that's wrong, that's inappropriate, what have you. And what it's actually calling for is it's a cry for help in an unconscious way. My moods were a way for me to try to express my energy and get somebody to help me express it. But more often than not, you're shamed for your mood. It's like, stop being so moody, get over it, right? Get on board with the program here. Or, if somebody bursts out in anger, it's like, that anger is not appropriate, young man or young lady. Learn how to control yourself, which is essentially what they're calling for. I need help in learning how to control myself, how to manage these emotions properly and effectively.
Yeah, so moodiness is one sign, if you guys are keeping track. Reactiveness is another sign. I'm going to add to it and say physical symptoms, like random,
Pain, physical.
illnesses and dis-ease. Doesn't have to be a disease, but a dis-ease in the body, random rashes. My own experience, I had like just random hives. I have no allergies, never have. But again, high school, or I don't know, some type of in my youth, I went through periods of just like hives all over. And then it took me years to figure out and look back to like, oh yeah, that was definitely suppressed emotions. I think, even with the Benadryl or whatever my parents gave me, it was kind of like it reduced it just enough to where it was bearable, but like, it never really got resolved until I started my healing journey in 2015 or 2016. So I'm going to add physical symptoms. Any other signs besides, so far we have our list: reactiveness, moodiness, physical symptoms. Is there anything else you want to add?
Distracting behaviors like eating unconsciously, doing all these sort of negative habits, addictive types of patterns, right? Again, I was a huge explorer of all of the ways you could numb yourself out to the world. So numbing behaviors, smoking a lot, drinking a lot, engaging in unconscious sexual activities, unconscious eating. All those are really, the underlying drive to that is an agitating energy under the surface that's, once again, just striving to call our attention to it, to resolve. And the more that we don't, the more painful it becomes, or the more uncomfortable. And then we do things to try to distract ourselves from that discomfort.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for adding that one. That one's powerful. Escapism, numbing. And again, you guys, this goes with, I really want to just highlight this list for self-awareness, right? It's not about making yourself feel bad. It's especially for those of us who've been on the healing journey. You know, we can't do it all in 1 year. We can't do it all in a month or one breathwork session or whatever you're doing. But you just come back to check in with yourself. Like, am I still, are those numbing behaviors still creeping back in? Are those random physical symptoms like happening for the first time in 5 years? Because then that could be a measure for you to check back in with yourself. So, or even your kids, if you're helping your kids through some healing and integration as well. So this is also interesting. Now I want to talk about the bypassing. I feel like this is a perfect time. So, um, I feel like I'll say this. I've observed that people rationalize, right? Like they logically fight for the bypassing. And so what with the bypassing, those situations, there could be a little bit of awareness there, like, yeah, I haven't really worked through this, or this situation is still impacting me. So they have the awareness of what it was or who was involved or what time in their life, but they still won't go all the way into it. So what are your thoughts? What is the impact of that spiritual bypassing or bypassing in general?
Well, it's a very tricky thing too, because I watched it happen in the ashram, in the monastic order all the time. And you think that people going in are higher level beings or more enlightened or what have you, and we're one of the monks used to joke that we're actually in a spiritual hospital, right? We're the ones that actually need the help more than than the average person out there. But bypassing, spiritual bypassing is so inviting in a way, because what we're doing is we're building. I use the analogy, we're building this structure like a skyscraper of our lives. We're building it, and it can look beautiful. We meditate more, we do all our spiritual practices. We're looking really good from the outside, but we're building that on a foundation of sand, right? So, structurally, if you build a skyscraper on sand, as long as nothing bothers it, it looks great and functions great. But as soon as the storms of trials and tribulations blow, that structure, the integrity of the foundation is exposed, or the lack of integrity, shall we say, of the foundation, and that whole thing topples, right? So the charm of it is we look great until those things happen, right? So here again, the foundation is so important to set, and really that means doing our emotional house cleaning, our emotional work, so that we can put the foundations in bedrock. And now it's usually a slower process. So one of the inviting parts of spiritual bypassing is it seems like we're making a lot quicker progress because we're avoiding
Right.
the heavy lifting, right? And so but it will, and I've seen it time and time again. I've seen it in my own life. I would say I qualified for being a spiritual bypasser on some level, right? To the degree that I wasn't facing those emotions. To my credit, I'd say my path led me to become aware that that's what I was doing, and then I took steps to correct it. But we cannot, we can't live forever without addressing that foundation at some point in the process.
Yes, thank you. And I love that analogy, building a high rise or whatever, building on top of sand, right? Obviously, that's not stable. So you
Right.
can think of bypassing like that. You don't have to judge yourself, you guys. It's more just like the awareness. And obviously, life is life. There's times where we can't dive into the argument that we had. We can't really unpack it. We got to keep moving. We got to get on the meeting. We got, like life does have this flow that most of us are trying to move with. I get that. But you know, someone told me, and I did it for a little while. This is a side note. Someone told me to schedule time in my calendar to revisit emotions. And this was before I became I did emotional healing for clients for a while, but right before that journey, I was doing it for myself to revisit emotions, and it was actually really helpful. And back to that analogy, I realized like this is real stability. This is real resilience. You know, a lot of us have this concept of resilience, like, oh, I'm strong, I'm going to fight through it, and I'm going to fight through the grief. You know, grief won't
Yeah.
take me down, I'll take it down.
Right,
You
right.
know, like just like we can kind of our mind can kind of get wrapped up in like this I'm stronger than the emotion type thing, but it's really like the surrender into the emotion, in my opinion,
Mhm, mhm.
adds to that resiliency. That takes strength within itself. And then you end up with a foundation. You may not notice it while you're doing it, but my opinion is like you'll end up with that stronger foundation. You know, maybe you were on the sand, and the next thing you know, the excavating has been done, the foundation's been properly built, and you'll see that in your life. And I would love to hear any of your other add-ons or thoughts to that.
Well, first of all, you're 100% speaking my language, right? It's there is no guilt and shame in in this journey. Wherever we are in the discovery, if somebody's listening to this and they're like, "Oh, I just realized now I've been doing this," right? That's beautiful, right? That is the point with which you can now build on. Uh, to some of the things that you were just saying, I like to presence that our greatest strength is in our ability to get vulnerable, right? It is our vulnerability where the seed of our greatest potential lies. And like that seed, it needs space, it needs the air, it needs the sunlight, it needs access to the rain in order to grow. But if we're protecting ourselves, it's like we put this iron dome over that seed, and now we think that we're helping it by keeping it protected, but now it can't get the sunlight or the rain or the nutrients that it needs to flourish and grow. So
Yeah.
it's a very it's a very important thing to understand, that vulnerability, learning to lean into our vulnerability, is the route to, once again, a stable strength. The other kind of strength, like you said, is bowling over our emotions, just trying to ignore them, move through them. And the interesting thing about emotions is they're very simple to deal with at a fundamental level. They just need space to be expressed. And I've heard many times that the actual lifespan of an emotion, if we were to actually let it play out, is about 90 seconds. If we
Yes.
have an emotion and we let it go, it takes about 90 seconds for that energy to complete before some new energy takes its place.
Yeah.
However, in that 90 seconds, we get uncomfortable with that and we end up
Yep.
holding it back. We may hold that energy for 30 years,
Yes.
or longer. And so that is the mind-boggling equation
Yes.
there, right?
Yeah. And thank you for stating that fact, because it's so important for us as adults to simplify it, to understand that perspective. 90 seconds, it's a three-step process. As long as, just like Christian said, as long as the process is not interrupted by you or someone else. Sometimes it is. Again, put it on your journal, your calendar, to come back and revisit it. But yeah, if you can surrender to it and sit with the discomfort, you'll be able to move through that process. So I'm so glad you brought in that fact there. Also, what role does the nervous system play in all of this? And what role does breath work play in all of this emotional processing?
So, well, the nervous system to me is the foundation of everything we're talking about. Really, we're talking about learning how to have a regulated nervous system, meaning to sit in the foundation of our parasympathetic, or our relaxation response aspect, versus being in our sympathetic or fight and flight response patterns. And this is, we have that as a way to help us manage danger, right? Our nervous system is uniquely designed to put us into fight or flight when there's a reason to either fight your way out or run like hell to get away from whatever the danger is. But what's happened these days is that we, again, in not dealing with this emotional energy, we're now keeping ourselves more in a baseline of that sympathetic, that anxious, tense, when's the next danger coming? And that is just, it's like your nerves are constantly burning energy. Here I use the analogy. It's like if you keep your lights on all the time, you keep your lights on all day long, all night. You don't need them at night, but they're on anyway. Somebody else turns their lights on in the day, turns them off at night. Which bulb is going to burn out quicker, right? The one that's constantly on. So here again, when our nerves are constantly on, be ready for whatever, they're eventually going to short circuit or burn out, or this is where some kind of physical issue starts to come, the hives, the whatever, right? That's coming from your system no longer having burned so much of its base energy to take care of all sorts of the functions of the body that it no longer can regulate properly, and different different abnormalities or maladies come up, and even that is the good news in a way, because that is trying to tell the body to slow down, to take rest, to recuperate, so that it can regenerate again. Now, this is where breathwork comes in. Breathwork is one of the tools, and in fact, I personally feel from my own experience and from 18 years of helping people discover their own healthy relationship with emotions, that breathwork is one of the most valuable and easiest to access methodologies for helping us get in touch with our emotions, to, as I said, help us to just express that emotional energy in a way that I'd say is quicker and actually less painful than if we just had to do it, in the cold, hard light of day.
Yeah. Do you have an experience that you'd be able to share that kind of just represents how impactful breathwork was for you at any point in time, even if it was in the beginning of your journey?
Yeah, and it was very much in the beginning of my journey. I, you know, it, emotions would come up, and I noticed, like, especially with sadness, like there's a lot of sadness inside, and I would, I noticed that I would yawn when emotion would start to come up. I would yawn, and that yawning was a way to, like, displace the emotional energy coming up.
Like, yeah.
It distracted me from it, and it took it back down. So when I started to make the connections and became aware of this, when I felt the yawn, I was like, this is an indication that these emotions are coming up. Now I want to keep them coming up instead of pushing them back down. So from the yawn, I started to go into breath work, right? I started to breathe, and it's almost like each breath brought the emotion up a little bit more. And then there was one moment, I remember quite well, where the dam broke or whatever, and all of a sudden, I just started bawling like a baby. And it was funny at first. That only lasted like 10 seconds. Like, I bawled like a baby, and then it like cleared up. And but in that moment, I chose to like reflect on that experience, and instead of going, oh, how weak you are, you just cried, it was like, I said, beautiful, I cried. I got some of this emotion out. I opened myself up to this more. And so the next time that happened, I was, able to let that emotion ride for a longer period of time and a longer period of time until, it was able to flow for as long as it needed to. And then it came to completion. And just like we were saying, when emotions have their space to express and completely play out, they're done, and a new state can come in. It's like rain comes in, it rains for half an hour, it rains for a day, but then the clouds part and the sun comes back out, right?
Yeah.
It's literally like that.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. I love that experience that you've had, and I've had so many. I mean, similar, some just, and it might have took me time, maybe like your yawns where it was like that was your signal that there was like something coming up you were trying to displace. For me, I felt a lot of resistance even when I was at a breath workshop or event or retreat. I'm like listening to everyone else and we're breathing and I'm like, thinking about my taxes, thinking about my real estate deals or whatever I had going on. I'm like, this is so, I was like, I see the meaning. And I remember even talking to myself, like I was so in my mind. And that resistance, that mental resistance, that was my signal. Like, oh, what happens if I just kind of let go of these thoughts and stop engaging in this mental dialogue? And it still might continue without me giving it attention, because our brain can do that. And as soon as I did that, I just dropped completely into the body, right? And then had this big emotional release. And I, ever since then, I continue to do it so many other times. And I would say even the most recent time that I did breath work on my own, I wanted an emotional release and maybe I didn't have one, available. But the next day there was all this creativity that came. There was like, and I just had a different relationship with like nature. And it was just like this whole, you never know what you're going to get out of it. But also I realized it was like time after that, I realized that was the emotion I was actually longing for. It was like this connection with my creativity, this connection with the universe. And maybe something got released during that breath work that wasn't as obvious, but that was kind of like the block. So I love how we're sharing our experiences and how powerful it could be. So especially if you're new to breath work or if you've seen those crazy videos on Instagram where, I mean, it looks intense, and yes, that might be your journey, and it also might not be. You never know, but you can't control that. You probably, and you don't even need to. Your body is so intelligent. So as we start to wrap up here, what are some tips if people are brand new to doing any type of somatic work for emotional processing, whether it's breath work or anything else? Let's just say someone's been working diligently in talk therapy and they're not sure on what some next steps would be. Would you recommend, some educational tools, books, or like what would you recommend for them to get started?
Yeah, well, I definitely would recommend that they connect with a guide, right? And that's my work basically. Whether they connect with a guide, like, I have a variety of options. There's a home study type of course, so you can do it in the comfort of your own home, or get involved in an online group session or private session, or if we happen to be in the same place, we can do it in person. But the important thing is that I like to stress there's nothing inherently dangerous about the process of breathing and the emotions coming up. What happens though is that, frankly, this has been energy that we've been trying to avoid for often decades of our lives. So it's very uncomfortable for us when we get in touch with it. That's when a guide is very helpful, just to remind you that this is exactly where you need to be, and you're doing the process like it's supposed to be done. And this catharsis of yucky energy, right, it is part of the process. Would you rather have a short period of time, of intense discomfort and then be done with it? Or would you like to hold on to that discomfort for the next, 20 or 30 or 40 years of your life and continually revisit it and constantly have to dodge it and escape it? right? So so a guide really is just there to help us understand that not feeling good in the moment is okay. And as we learn that ourselves, we have the visceral experience. We start to know, wow, I just experienced that and I didn't die, or I didn't, life didn't come to an end, or however, whatever crazy things we're thinking about happening. And then that is our own, that is the bricks in this new foundation, right? And soon enough, we can take it on our own. And in fact, to me, my whole work is to teach self-empowerment, to teach people how to be reliant on themselves and not need a whole lot of externals to help support or feel like they need those things in order to get through their life. But we have it all within ourselves. Once again, why breathwork is so powerful is because it is a self-generated experience, right?
Yeah.
We create it. The amount of depth you go to is completely in the amount of level of your ability to let go and surrender. And the pace that you go is completely yours to set. And the more that we go through it and get to the end and say, wow, I made it, and like I said, I didn't die or nothing bad happened, we're more confident that we can do it again. And then we end up being able to do it again all by ourselves. And even when crazy weird stuff comes up that we might have been concerned about in the past, now we're comfortable. We know we can handle it. We know we have that resilience. And that to me is, what I'm striving to help every person that comes across my path to get to, because we are all, as in the beginning question, who am I, is really who we all are, right? Sparks of the divine, and that divine energy just wants to come out. Emotional energy is just a subset of that divine life energy. And if we're blocking that, it's just blocking that flow. So when you said, you didn't get an emotional release, but you got the energy flowing, which stimulated the creativity. This is, creative life force is coming through. Now it's moving again. So now you
and
are
that
in
is the
alignment.
emotional release. That was the emotion trying to express, but it was like feeling stuck, right? So it doesn't always have to look like sadness or grief. Although, again, your body's going to prioritize whatever is the highest priority, whatever really needs to be addressed. So just trust yourself, trust the divine, trust the universe. And I love that you mentioned the guide as a first step, because sometimes people can like go to books and research and get in that mental capacity and they're learning all about it and they're learning about the science, but it's like, just grab the guide, give yourself like that container, that environment to feel safe, and then you just allow yourself to, you just surrender. You just allow the guide, like Christian or anyone else, to guide you through the process moment by moment. And that's part of the surrender process. It all works together. Even you taking the first step to trust someone's container that they're holding, that's even a big step for some people in the breathwork container. So I love that you mentioned that. And then also, I just want to share some of my last thoughts, and then we'll just do a few takeaways from you. Everything that Chris and I are talking about today, from my highlight that I really want to just, remind us all, is that being present in our own lives is so important. And this emotional awareness and processing and the breath work, so many of us are living in the past, or we're living in the future because we don't want to be in the past, but we can't be in the present because we just don't have that capacity. So now we're in the future. That can create a whole nother level of anxiety. So and just that destabilization, just your foundation's not there. So if you're probably taking away so many different things from this conversation, but that's the last key takeaway I want to leave you with. And then Christian, if there's anything else that you want to leave us with, that would be great.
Just to build on that is to say, there's a quote from author Michael Brown from The Presence Process, a book called The Presence Process, beautiful book and beautiful process. And he said, the only place we can experience the presence, meaning the divinity, the creative essence of life, is in the present. right? And we know we're in the past if we're generally dwelling in guilt and shame. We know we're in the future if we're generally anxious and tense, right? So it's in the present that life, the presence, this creative spontaneity and creativity is generated. The only place we can breathe is in the present. So when we focus our attention on our breath via the vehicle of breath work, it inherently brings us back to the present. And as often as we practice, we're practicing coming back to this present moment where life happens, and that is the magic. One of the magics of breath work.
Amazing. How can people find you? His details is attached to the podcast just below. So go to the box, but how can they find you? Maybe just one or two links.
The best link is probably, as this is, breathflow.com. So breathflow.com is my website.
Namaste, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Christian, for your time and your energy.
Thank you so much.